When a billionaire's world of wealth meets a street musician's simple melody, neither he nor his silent son could imagine how a single tune could change their lives forever. The man was known everywhere for his wealth. Newspapers often carried his name on their business pages. Magazines wrote about his lifestyle, and people in the city whispered about his empire whenever his luxury cars passed by. He owned companies in different countries, flew in private jets, and lived in a mansion that looked more like a palace. For the outside world, he was the picture of success, the man who had achieved everything a human being could dream of. Yet, behind the tall glass walls of his mansion, behind the doors that only a few could enter, there lived a sadness that no money could cure. His sadness had a name: Daniel. The boy was his only child, the apple of his eye. It's the heir he had once imagined would inherit not just his wealth, but also his dreams and ambitions. When Daniel was born, the father had felt the same joy every parent feels when they first hold their baby. He remembered the way he had looked at the tiny fingers that gripped his hand and the soft breathing that brought him peace after long, stressful days. He had made silent promises that day. Promises that he would give his son the world. Promises that he would protect him, teach him, and one day, proudly watch him grow into a man who could speak and stand tall like him. But as the years passed, those promises began to feel like broken pieces scattered on the ground. Daniel grew, but he did not speak. The first words most parents long to hear, "Papa" or "Mama," never came from his lips. At first, doctors told them not to worry. Some children spoke late, they explained, and by the age of 3 or 4, he might surprise them. Father waited, brought in the best speech therapists money could hire. He paid for specialists from different parts of the world to examine Daniel. Each time he heard the word normal, he felt a spark of hope. Yet days turned into months, months into years, and still silence. Daniel was not like other children. He never joined the games that other kids played in the garden. He never shouted in excitement, and he never cried loudly when hurt. He lived quietly in his own small world, staring at books with pictures, arranging toys in neat lines, and often sitting by the window for hours, watching the world move while he remained still. Sometimes he would smile faintly, but mostly his face was blank, as if there was a glass wall between him and everyone else. The billionaire tried everything to break that wall. He sat by Daniel's side at night and read him stories with great effort, exaggerating voices, making funny faces, hoping the boy would laugh, or at least repeat a word. He would point at things and say their names: car, ball, dog. But Daniel would only blink, sometimes touching the object gently but never speaking. There were times when the father would lose his patience. He would close the book, turn away, and his eyes would burn with helpless tears. For a man who could buy anything in the world, it was the most painful thing to realize that he could not buy his son's voice. The mansion, despite its size, often felt empty. His wife, though gentle and caring, had grown distant too. She loved Daniel dearly, but her heart had grown tired of waiting for miracles. She lived in a constant state of quiet sorrow, her smiles faint and her laughter rare. Dinner at the large dining table, often passed in silence, broken only by the sound of cutlery and the occasional attempt by the father to ask Daniel questions he never answered. Sometimes the father would look across the long table at his wife and see her looking at Daniel with moist eyes, and both of them would look away, as if afraid of showing each other the storm inside their hearts. Outside, the world praised him for his success. Business partners shook his hand firmly. Employees admired him. The media celebrated him. But deep inside, he felt like a failure. What kind of success was it, he often asked himself, if he could not succeed in reaching the heart of his own child? What good was money if it could not make his son say a single word to him? There were nights when he would sneak into Daniel's room after the boy had fallen asleep. He would stand by the bed watching his son's chest rise and fall, his small hands curled gently near his face. The billionaire would lean down, kiss his forehead, and whisper, "Please, my boy, say something one day. Anything, call me Papa. Just once." He would then turn away quickly, before his tears could fall on the boy's pillow. One evening, after another long day at work, The father sat alone in his study, surrounded by bookshelves and awards that meant nothing to him anymore. His gaze fell on a photograph of Daniel, taken when he was 2 years old. The boy was sitting in the garden, a stuffed bear in his lap, looking at the camera with wide, innocent eyes. The father picked up the frame and whispered, "What do you need, son? Tell me. Show me, I'll give you anything." But silence answered him once again. He remembered the time he had taken Daniel to a world-famous clinic abroad. The doctors had put the boy through countless tests. They had scanned his brain, checked his hearing, measured everything that could be measured. Finally, the chief doctor had called him into the office. "Your son has no physical problem," the doctor had said gently. "He can hear. He can process information. But something inside him, emotional, psychological, keeps him from speaking. It might be selective mutism, or a form of autism. Or perhaps something we don't fully understand. Speech might come one day, or it might never come." Words had felt like a blade to the father's chest. On the flight back home, he had stared out the window, trying to imagine a life where his son never spoke. The thought was unbearable. The father was not a man who gave up easily. His entire fortune had been built on fighting battles that others thought impossible. But with Daniel, it was different. This was not a battle he could win with strategy, money, or power. It was a mystery he could not solve, a wall he could not break, and it left him powerless. Still, he tried to connect with Daniel in other ways. He built a playroom filled with toys from all over the world. He hired private tutors who used pictures, colors, and sounds to reach the boy. Sometimes he would take him to the park, walking beside him quietly, holding his hand though the boy rarely squeezed it back. And yet, despite the silence, the father never stopped hoping. Every day when he returned home from work, he would glance toward Daniel's room, half expecting to hear a voice calling out for him. And every day, silence greeted him like an old, stubborn shadow. Over the years, the billionaire's love for his son grew stronger, not weaker. He found himself longing for the smallest signs of progress: an extra smile, a longer glance, a hum. He became more protective, shielding Daniel from people who might not understand him. But deep inside, the father was slowly breaking. For all his power, he felt like a man standing in the middle of an endless desert, calling out for an echo that never came back. It was in this quiet, painful reality that his life continued. The world knew him as a billionaire, a man of iron, will, and success. But only he knew that behind the high walls of his mansion lived a boy who never spoke, and a father who would have traded his entire fortune just to hear one word. The evening air was cool, carrying with it the hum of the city. Cars moved steadily on the road, their headlights glowing like restless fireflies. Vendors called out, their voices blending with the chatter of people and the occasional bark of a street dog. The billionaire held his son's small hand as they walked along the busy pavement. He rarely took him out into such crowded places, but that day something inside him had urged him to do so. Perhaps he thought the sights and sounds might awaken a part of his son that had remained hidden. Daniel walked quietly beside him, his eyes darting around. Curious, but silent as always. The father looked down at him often, studying his face, hoping to catch even the smallest change. Daniel usually walked with little expression, but tonight there was a flicker of something, maybe interest, maybe wonder. The father tightened his grip gently, his heart aching with both love and longing. He wanted his son to feel the world, to connect with it, to respond in some way. He guided him through the street, past the glowing food stalls, the perfume of roasted corn, the laughter of children chasing each other in the square. And then it happened. A soft melody cut through the noise of the city. It wasn't the sound of horns or the shouts of vendors. It was the gentle, almost fragile tune of a violin. The notes floated through the air, rising above the chaos, as though they belonged to another world. Daniel stopped walking. His small body stiffened for a moment, then relaxed. His eyes turned toward the sound. The father, noticing, followed. His gaze, there, under a dim streetlight, stood a man with a violin in his hands. His clothes were worn, his shoes dusty, and his case lay open on the ground with only a few coins scattered inside. People passed by, some glancing briefly, others ignoring him altogether. Yet, the man played with a passion that ignored the indifference around him. His eyes were closed, his head bent slightly, and his bow moved gracefully across the strings. The music he created was not loud, not demanding, but filled with a strange sadness and beauty that made it impossible to forget. Daniel let go of his father's hand and walked slowly toward the sound. The billionaire froze for a second. His son rarely showed interest in anything outside his small world. But now he was moving forward on his own, his steps careful yet drawn as if by an invisible thread. The father followed closely, his heart beating faster with each step. Daniel stopped a few feet away from the violinist and simply stood there, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, listening. The father stood behind him, watching with astonishment. For years he had tried to reach his son with toys, with books, with specialists, and nothing had broken through. But now, here in the middle of a busy street, a stranger with a worn-out violin had managed to catch his son's soul. He saw Daniel's fingers twitch slightly, almost as if he wanted to touch. The sound itself, his face, usually blank, showed a softness, flicker of emotion that made the father's chest tighten. The violinist opened his eyes and noticed the boy standing there. At first he looked surprised, then smiled gently, continuing to play as though the child were his only audience. The notes grew smoother, warmer, as if the musician himself had felt the silent connection. People continued to walk past, but the boy and the violinist remained in their own world. Daniel lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged just a few steps from the musician. The billionaire had never seen him do something like this before, usually resisted sitting anywhere but home or school. Yet now, he sat willingly, his gaze fixed on the violin. The father's throat tightened as he blinked rapidly, holding back tears. He knelt beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder, but Daniel didn't turn away. His focus was entirely on the music, as though it was speaking to him in a language only he could understand. The violinist shifted the tune, playing something brighter, lighter. Daniel's lips curved slightly. It wasn't a full smile, but it was more than the father had seen in months. His son's eyes glistened with life, and his small hands moved in rhythm, tapping lightly against his knees. The father felt a lump in his throat grow larger. It dreamed of moments like this, of seeing his son respond, of watching his emotions break free. And now, in front of a stranger on a busy street, that miracle seemed to be unfolding. The music came to an end. The violinist opened his eyes again and gave a small nod to the boy. Daniel looked back at him, then clapped softly. The sound was faint, almost timid, but it was clapping nonetheless. The billionaire could hardly believe it. His son, who never reacted to anything, was clapping for a street musician. He turned his face away briefly, wiping the corner of his eye before anyone could notice. The violinist bent down slightly, speaking in a soft voice. "Thank you, little one." He wasn't sure if the boy would respond, but he wanted to acknowledge him. Daniel said nothing, of course, but his eyes shone with a brightness the father had never seen before. The billionaire stepped forward and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a large note and placed it gently into the violin case. The violinist looked up, surprised, and shook his head slightly. "Sir, this is too much," he said. His voice was humble, almost embarrassed. But the father only gave a small smile. "No amount is too much for what you just gave me," he replied quietly. The violinist didn't understand the full meaning of his words, but he nodded gratefully and returned to playing. Daniel stayed seated, listening once more, and the father stayed beside him, silent but filled with emotions he couldn't put into words. He realized something important that night. He realized that his son might not speak with words, but he was speaking through his eyes, through his reactions, through the way he had been drawn to music. And that was more than he had ever hoped for. The night grew deeper, and the crowd slowly thinned. The violinist packed his instrument, nodding politely as he prepared to leave. Daniel's eyes followed him, and for the first time, The father noticed a hint of sadness in his boy's face, as if he didn't want the moment to end. He knelt down and whispered, "Do you want to see him again, Daniel?" The boy didn't answer with words, but he leaned slightly toward the direction the musician had gone. It was enough, the father understood. He took his son's hand again, but this time Daniel didn't resist. He walked with him quietly, glancing back once or twice at the place where the violinist had stood. The father felt something stirring. Inside him, a feeling he had not experienced in years. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to reach his son. And perhaps it would not be through doctors or therapies, but through something far simpler, something pure. Through music. That night, as they drove back to the mansion, the father kept glancing at Daniel in the back seat. The boy's eyes were still wide, as if the music was replaying inside his mind. He looked peaceful, even happy. The billionaire tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind already racing with thoughts. He knew he had to find that violinist again. Had to. Bring him back into their lives. Because tonight, in the middle of a noisy street, a miracle had begun. The billionaire could not stop thinking about that night. The sound of the violin, and the way Daniel had sat on the street, listening with all his heart, played over and over in his mind. He had seen his son smile faintly, clap softly and show interest in something for the first time. That moment had left a deep mark on him. For days afterward, he kept wondering if it had been a coincidence, or if music truly had the power to touch his boy's silent world. He found himself determined to test it again. He wanted to see if the violinist could spark the same reaction. The next evening, he took Daniel back to the same street. The air was again filled with noise and movement, but he searched for the sound of the violin. It took a few minutes, but then he heard it, the familiar melody rising gently through the chaos. He saw the same man, standing under the streetlight, playing as though he was pouring his heart into every note. Daniel's head turned immediately. His steps quickened, and once again he sat down on the ground, eyes locked on the instrument. The father's chest tightened with emotion. It was not a coincidence. His son was truly connected to the music. Day after day, they returned. Sometimes Daniel would sit silently, staring at the violinist. Sometimes he would move his fingers in rhythm, or tap his knees softly. Once he even hummed a faint tune, so quiet the father almost thought he had imagined it. Each evening, the billionaire felt more certain that this man was the key to his son's hidden world. One night, after the small crowd had gone and the violinist was packing up, the father approached him. "My name is Richard," he said quietly. The violinist looked up, his tired eyes meeting his. "I'm Samuel," the man replied, his voice calm but humble. Richard glanced at his son, who was still staring at the violin case. "You've touched him in a way no one else ever has," Richard admitted. "He doesn't speak. He hasn't spoken a single word in his life. But with your music, something is different." Samuel looked at Daniel with surprise, then back at Richard. "Music has a way of reaching where words cannot," he said softly. "Maybe he feels safe in it." Richard felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to ask Samuel for help, but he hesitated. Samuel was just a street musician, living on coins and small notes. Could he really become part of their lives? Yet the image of Daniel clapping and humming pushed him forward. "Would you come play for him? At our home?" "I'll pay you well," Richard said. Samuel looked hesitant. He was not used to offers like this. "Sir, I don't play for money," he said carefully. "I play because music is all I have left." Richard studied him curiously. "What do you mean all you have left?" Samuel sighed, his eyes clouding with old memories. He explained how he had once dreamed of playing on grand stages. In his youth he had studied music passionately, hoping to perform for the world, but life had not been kind. His family had fallen apart, poverty had dragged him down, and slowly he had lost everything: his home, his opportunities, his dreams. The streets had become his only stage. The violin was the last piece of his past that remained, and he played it not for glory, but for survival. Richard listened quietly, humbled. Here was a man who had nothing, yet gave so much through his music. He placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. You may have lost the stage you dreamed of, but maybe you found a new one. My son needs you. I need you. Please come to our home." Samuel looked at Daniel once more. The boy's eyes were still shining with the same fascination. Samuel nodded slowly. "I will come," he said. The next week, Samuel walked into the grand mansion, carrying only his violin. The servants looked at him curiously, unsure why their master had invited such a man. But Richard ignored their stares. He led Samuel into the large living room, where Daniel was waiting quietly. The boy's eyes lit up as soon as he saw the violin. He sat up straighter, his hands moving nervously in excitement. Samuel smiled and began to play. The sound filled the high-ceilinged room, soft at first, then swelling with warmth. Daniel's face glowed. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the strings. Day after day, Samuel returned. He began to play different tunes, sometimes joyful, sometimes gentle and calming. Slowly, Daniel started responding more. He would clap more confidently, tap rhythms with his fingers, and hum louder. One afternoon, when Samuel stopped suddenly in the middle of a tune, Daniel made a small noise, almost like a protest. It was not a word, but it was a sound. Richard, standing nearby, felt his eyes well up. For years he had longed to hear his son's voice in any form, and now music had pulled it out. The bond between Daniel and Samuel grew deeper. Samuel would sit on the floor with him, letting him touch the violin strings, guiding his small hands to hold the bow. At first, Daniel only plucked a string or two, but gradually he began imitating the movements. His face would light up whenever a sound came out. Richard watched these moments with his heart overflowing. For the first time in years, he felt like he was watching his son come alive. As the days passed, Richard also found himself drawn to Samuel's presence. He would sit with him after the sessions, talking about life, about music, about loss. Samuel shared stories of nights spent hungry, of the loneliness that had followed him since his family had gone. Yet despite his hardships, his eyes still held a quiet strength. Richard, who was used to boardrooms and powerful men, found something different in Samuel's, something human. One evening, after a session, Richard asked Samuel, "Why do you think my son connects with music this way?" Samuel looked at Daniel, who was carefully touching the strings. "Because music asks for nothing," he replied. "Words demand answers. Questions demand responses. But music just exists. It lets him feel without pressure. It gives him a voice without asking him to speak." Richard sat silently, absorbing the truth in those words. For years he had tried to make Daniel speak, tried to push him toward communication. But Samuel was right. Music had done what force never could, gave the boy freedom. The changes in Daniel soon became impossible to ignore. His teachers noticed. He was more attentive in class, more responsive to pictures and sounds. At home he smiled more, laughed softly at times, and even reached for his father's hand willingly. Once, while Samuel was playing, Daniel leaned against his father's side, resting his head on his shoulder. Richard froze, his heart swelling. His son had never shown such closeness before. He put his arm around him gently, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. Tears rolled silently down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. The mansion, once filled with emptiness, now echoed with music and laughter. The servants whispered among themselves about the change in the boy, and even Richard's wife began to smile again. She often stood by the door, watching Samuel play, her eyes shining with gratitude. She would later tell Richard, "I feel like we are finally hearing our son's soul." But the one who felt it most deeply was Richard himself. He had spent years believing that his money could solve every problem, that success meant control. Now he realized that life's most precious gifts could come from the simplest sources: a man on the street, a wooden violin, and a melody that touched the heart. For the first time, Richard began to feel that his son was not lost to silence forever. He was simply waiting for the right song to set him free. One evening, the sky was painted in soft orange and purple as the sun slowly sank behind the city buildings. The mansion garden looked calm, the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. Samuel had come once again, carrying his violin as he always did. Daniel was already waiting, sitting on the grass with a quiet eagerness in his eyes. He had grown used to Samuel's visits, and the moment he saw the instrument in his hands, a glow appeared on his face that his father never grew tired of seeing. Richard sat nearby on a bench, watching them with the same mix of hope and nervousness that had become a part of him. Samuel began to play. The melody floated softly across the garden, delicate at first, then swelling with warmth and life. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes wide, his little hands moving slightly in rhythm. He had learned to hum with the tunes now, not words but sounds, shaky and faint, yet filled with meaning. Richard listened intently, his heart racing with every small noise his son made. Each hum felt like a step forward, like a door slowly opening. As the song grew richer, Samuel glanced at Daniel and smiled, encouraging him. Daniel's lips moved silently at first, then a soft sound escaped. It was so quiet that Richard almost thought it was the wind, but then he realized it was his son's voice. The boy was trying to say something. He leaned closer, his eyes locked on his son. Daniel's mouth opened again, and this time a word formed, small and broken, but clear enough. Music. The sound cut through Richard's heart like lightning. For a moment he froze, unable to breathe, afraid he might have imagined it. But then Daniel repeated music. His small voice trembled, yet it was real. The father's eyes filled with tears, his chest heaving as though years of pain were breaking free all at once. He dropped his face into his hands, shaking with silent sobs. For years he had begged, prayed, pleaded to hear one word from his son, and now here it was. Samuel lowered his violin slowly, stunned himself. He looked at the boy with wide eyes, then at Richard, who could hardly contain his emotions. Daniel simply smiled faintly and reached for the violin, touching the strings gently as if the word itself had been born from them. Richard stood, wiping his eyes quickly, and knelt down beside his son. "Say it again," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please, Daniel, say it again." The boy looked at him, then at the violin, and repeated softly, "Music." Richard pulled him into his arms, holding him tightly as though he would never let go. Tears streamed down his face, falling into Daniel's hair, but he didn't care. He pressed his lips to his son's head and whispered, thank you, my boy. You've given me the world." That night changed everything. The word spread through the house like fire. Staff whispered with excitement. The mother cried with joy, and Richard walked around with a smile that refused to fade. For the first time, his son had spoken. It was not Papa or Mama, but it didn't matter. It was the beginning, the spark he had waited for. In the days that followed, Samuel came more often. He played not just for Daniel, but with him. The boy learned to hold the bow, his small hands awkward but eager. Samuel guided him patiently, showing him how to pull sound from the strings. Sometimes the notes were rough, screeching, and uneven. But Daniel would laugh quietly at his own mistakes, and Richard's heart would swell with joy. He had never heard his son laugh like that before. Each new sound Daniel made was celebrated like a victory. Sometimes he would whisper more when the music stopped, or say again in a faint voice. Each word felt like a miracle, and Richard found himself recording them secretly, afraid to lose even one. He began keeping a notebook, writing down every new word, every small progress, treasuring them as the most valuable things he owned. Richard also began to see changes in himself. For years he had lived like a man hardened by business, speaking in commands, always chasing bigger victories. But now his heart softened. He found joy not in deals or profits, but in simple things: the sound of his son humming, the sight of him smiling, the touch of his small hand gripping his finger. He began spending more time at home, canceling meetings, surprising everyone around him. His colleagues could not understand why the powerful billionaire seemed less interested in money, but Richard knew the answer. He had already found something priceless. One evening, when the three of them were in the garden again, Richard turned to Samuel. "You've changed my son's life," he said sincerely. "You've changed mine too. I don't know how to thank you." Samuel shook his head. "Don't thank me," he replied. Thank music. It only needed someone to listen. Richard smiled but knew deep inside that Samuel had been the bridge, the one who carried that music into their lives. Without him, Daniel might have remained in silence forever. Soon, the bond between the three of them grew into something like a small family. Samuel, once a lonely street musician, now came every day, greeted warmly by everyone in the mansion. Daniel waited for him eagerly, often sitting near the window before he arrived, his eyes scanning the driveway. The moment Samuel stepped in, with his violin case, the boy's face lit up with a joy that made everyone else smile too. The turning point had not only given Daniel his first word, but it had also given Richard a new understanding of life. He began to notice things he had once ignored: the sound of birds in the morning, the laughter of children in the park, the warmth of his wife's quiet presence. He realized that happiness was not in the roar of success, but in the gentle notes of everyday miracles. Daniel continued to surprise them. One afternoon, when Samuel finished a tune, Daniel looked up at his father and whispered, "Papa." Richard's breath caught in his throat. He had imagined this moment for years, but hearing it felt like stepping into a dream. He dropped to his knees, tears spilling once again, and hugged his son tightly. "Yes, my boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "Papa is here." The silence that had once haunted the mansion was slowly replaced with music, laughter, and words. Not many, not perfect, but precious beyond measure. And every time Richard heard his son say music, he remembered that night in the garden, the violin's melody, and the miracle that had changed their lives forever. Time passed, and the mansion that had once echoed with silence now resonated with music, laughter, and new beginnings. Daniel had grown more confident with each passing day. Words began to flow slowly, uncertain at first, but steadily gaining strength. The shy whispers turned into short sentences, and the once timid boy now spoke with clarity and emotion. Richard watched his son with awe and pride, marveling at the transformation that had seemed impossible just months before. Every day he felt as if he were discovering his son anew, each small word a treasure, each smile a victory. Samuel had become an inseparable part of their lives. No longer just a street musician, he now played in the mansion almost daily, guiding Daniel through melodies, harmonies, and simple compositions. Richard often found them sitting together for hours, Daniel's small hands moving clumsily on the strings, Samuel's patient fingers guiding him, and music filling the room with warmth. The house had changed in more ways than one. It had become alive, vibrant, and full of hope. Richard, too, had changed profoundly. The experience had softened him, reshaped his priorities, and taught him the value of patience, humility, and empathy. The man who once believed in the power of money above all else now understood that some things, love, connection, understanding, could not be bought or forced. He had learned to listen, truly listen, to his son and to those around him. Family had grown closer than ever, bound not by wealth or status, but by shared joy and the simple power of music. One afternoon, Daniel attempted to play a short melody all by himself. Samuel had guided him through it many times, but this time, the boy's fingers moved on their own. The notes were hesitant at first, slightly off, but each one rang with determination. Richard stood nearby, holding his breath, his eyes glistening. As Daniel finished, a small, proud smile spread across his face. Samuel clapped softly, beaming, and Richard felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. It was not just music. It was a symbol of triumph, independence, and the remarkable journey they had all shared. The experience had also sparked a change in Richard's approach to life. He began involving himself in charitable work, helping children with disabilities, and supporting programs that used music as therapy. He wanted other families to experience the miracle he had witnessed firsthand. Each time he saw a child respond to music, he remembered Daniel's first hum, his first word, and the unwavering patience of Samuel. These memories became his driving force, reminding him of the incredible power of compassion and understanding. Samuel too found his life transformed. Once struggling to survive on the streets, he now had a purpose and a family who valued him. He discovered that his music could heal and connect, that it could give life and hope where there was despair. The gratitude in Richard's eyes, the joy in Daniel's laughter, and the warmth of their home offered him a sense of belonging he had not known for years. Samuel realized that the life he had lost had been replaced by one even more meaningful, where his talent and heart had room to flourish. Daniel continued to progress, speaking more, singing along with Samuel's tunes, and even attempting to compose his own little songs. Richard encouraged every effort, no matter how small, knowing that each word, each note, each melody represented a step toward freedom and self-expression. The mansion was now filled with the sound of music at all hours, the walls echoing with the growth, joy, and creativity of a once silent child who had found his voice. Richard often thought back to the night they had first encountered Samuel on the street. He remembered the quiet intensity of the music, the gentle sway of the bow, the way his son had reacted, eyes wide with fascination. He realized that life had a way of guiding them to the right people at the right time. That chance encounter had changed the trajectory of their lives forever. He marveled at how a single act of patience and generosity, inviting Samuel into their home, had unlocked a world of possibilities for Daniel and himself. The bond between Samuel and Daniel grew stronger with each passing day. They'd laughed together, played together, and shared moments of quiet understanding. Sometimes, Daniel would place his small hand on Samuel's arm, guiding him to slow down or play a different note, and Samuel would follow, smiling with admiration. Their connection was deeper than words, founded on trust, music, and the gentle power of patience. Richard found immense satisfaction in watching Daniel flourish. Every milestone, his first sentence, his first story, the first song he played, entirely on his own, felt like a triumph. The boy's world had expanded beyond silence, and Richard was privileged to witness it firsthand. He also grew to appreciate the importance of humility, recognizing that life's most valuable lessons often come from unexpected sources. It's like a street musician with a humble violin. Life began to take on a rhythm and a flow that was richer, warmer, and more meaningful. Richard, Samuel, and Daniel formed a unique trio, each contributing something irreplaceable: love, music, and hope. Even the mansion, once a cold and quiet space, seemed to hum with life, its rooms and hallways echoing with joy and the soft resonance of melodies. Eventually, Richard decided to host a small concert, inviting close friends, family, and some of the children from his charitable programs. Daniel would perform alongside Samuel, sharing the music that had brought him to life. The day of the concert, the mansion's hall was filled with anticipation and warmth. When Daniel stepped forward to play his first piece with Samuel, the audience watched in awe as the boy's fingers moved with growing confidence, producing notes that carried emotion and clarity. Richard felt tears fill his eyes once again, proud beyond words. Witnessing the culmination of a journey that had begun with a single hum in the garden, the performance was a triumph, not because of perfection, but because of courage, growth, and the undeniable transformation of a once silent child into a young boy capable of expression and connection. The applause was heartfelt and genuine, and Daniel beamed at the approval and encouragement surrounding him. Samuel stood beside him, smiling proudly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. Richard, seated in the front row, felt his heart swell knowing that his son had achieved what once seemed impossible. Through this experience, Richard learned that patience, love, and understanding were more powerful than wealth, influence, or control. He had discovered that miracles could emerge in the simplest forms: a melody, a gentle hand, and a patient heart. He also realized that the greatest gift he could give his son was not material, but the freedom to express himself, to explore, and to grow at his own pace. As the years went by, Daniel continued to thrive. His vocabulary expanded, his confidence blossomed, and his love for music deepened. He often composed small tunes, improvising with Samuel, who encouraged his creativity and nurtured his talent. Richard found immense satisfaction in watching his son embrace life, and he never took a single day for granted. The mansion remained a place of music and laughter. Samuel stayed close, becoming not only a mentor but a cherished member of the family. Richard and his wife grew closer, their hearts softened by the joy and progress of their son. They understood that true happiness came not from wealth or status, but from witnessing growth, nurturing potential, and sharing love. The story of Daniel's transformation became a source of inspiration for many. Richard used his influence to advocate for music therapy, for support of children with disabilities, and for programs that valued patience, creativity, and empathy. He often recounted the journey the day they met Samuel, the first hum, the first word, and the gradual unfolding of Daniel's voice. He emphasized the power of connection, of listening, and of allowing children to grow in their own time. Ultimately, Daniel's life became a testament to the power of patience, love, and music. From a silent, withdrawn child, he grew into a confident, expressive, and joyful young boy, capable of sharing his inner world with those who loved him. Richard found fulfillment not in his wealth, but in the happiness, growth, and voice of his son. Samuel, once a lonely street musician, found a family and purpose beyond what he had imagined. Together they had created a world filled with sound, connection, and hope, a world in which miracles were possible. Even from the most unexpected beginnings, the mansion no longer stood as a symbol of isolation or wealth. Instead, it became a place where music, love, and patience intertwined, where every note played carried the story of resilience, compassion, and transformation. And through it all, Daniel's voice, once silent, became a melody of hope, a living proof that even the quietest hearts could find their song, and that a single act of kindness could change the course of many lives forever.